In this video, I want to show you a method for writing a short story using a formula. Well, actually, it's two formulas. The first will be to come up with the original idea for the story, and the second will be to develop it. And the second formula will be the most outrageous short story formula ever devised, which I got from Kurt Vonnegut. But be warned, this method took me to the brink of madness and beyond, and also drenched up some dark material about the lives of medieval nuns, which some viewers might find disturbing. So welcome to another installment in my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. Now, the whole point of having a formula is it helps us defeat the writer's greatest foe. It helps us slay the dragon of the blank, empty white page. And so for inspiration, I've taken the bus up Banbury Road to this place. This is where Tolkien lived in the 1930s. That's his house over there. And he once said in a BBC interview that he was at home here marking Anglo-Saxon exam papers, and one of the papers contained a blank page. And on impulse, without knowing why, he wrote on it, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." Well, he didn't know what a hobbit was, but thus, from this tiny fragment was born the Lord of the Rings. And this is the point about the blank page. You have to get something on it, anything, and anything is better than nothing. And once you get something, it calls to you. To come up with the initial idea, I'm going to use a quite well-known formula which involves writing 3 unconnected things down on the page. And it could be anything, objects, memories, smells, places, anything. So I wrote down a jar of melted snow, a telegram, and a lighthouse. Now the aim is to let your mind rove and wander over these and hope that various connections will emerge, and from that, and the gist of a story idea. So I started with telegrams. You can't go wrong with that, can you? Because telegrams mark the great turning points in human history, or they did before email. Your births, marriages, deaths, beloved sons lost in combat or shipwrecks. Regret to inform the SS Nantucket lost in storm. Or how about this one from a passenger on the Titanic? Fine ship, fine voyage. Well, you just never know, do you? So I moved on to lighthouses. Now, I'd always been attracted by the romantic image of the solitary lighthouse keeper, but I knew in my heart this was a false image, so I did some Googling and came up with some really good story material. For a start, there was never ever only one. There was at least 2, and they usually hated each other. And there was a lot of mental ill health attached to the job of being a lighthouse keeper. Quite often, well, not often, but from time to time, they'd find lighthouses completely abandoned with no trace of the men. And this was not just the ill health, mental ill health, was not just because of the pressure cooker environment of the psychological stress. It was also because they used to float the light in a giant bath of mercury to make it easier to move. And they didn't know then, but mercury fumes are highly toxic. That's where we get the Mad Hatter name from, because the hat industry also used mercury to soften the felt in the 19th century. And a lot of them then went mad. And this reminded me of my favourite story from medieval France about a convent in the 14th century where a nun started to meow like a cat. And then another nun copied her, and then another, and very soon the whole convent was mewing like cats. And they only stopped when they sent the soldiers round to whip them. And the point is that they're very similar in a way, aren't they? The psychological stress of living in a convent or alone in a lighthouse. I thought we were off to a good start here. And then I moved on to the jar of melted snow. And here the wheels came off a little bit because I couldn't really think of much. I wondered why someone would keep such a item, and I thought of maybe to remind them of a holiday in the Alps or a Christmas or a snowman they made in celebration of something. And I thought of the sleigh from Citizen Kane called Rosebud. Citizen Kane, a man who gained the world but lost his soul. But that was about it, really. Nothing would come. And then, doubt. You loser. "You fool! You idiot! You nincompook! How could you ever think that such a stupid idea would work? How could you have the audacity to invent such a crazy, dumb idea for your YouTube channel? You bring shame on the Price family going back for 1,000 years. You don't deserve to be born." Well, you know the drill, the old "I wish I'd never been born" routine, an integral and routine part of the creation of any piece of fiction, as I'm sure you've discovered. So I thought about it, and I knew that the muse always delivers, but only at the 11th hour, and only after she's broken you on the wheel of despair. So I carried on. I looked back at the lighthouse and the nuns, and then I remembered a great movie from 1947, I think, called Black Narcissus, and it's about a party of Anglican nuns in the Himalayas who open a school in a building which used to be the Maharaja's harem, and there are still erotic drawings on the walls, and there's this intense pressure cooker environment of repressed sexual energy, and they're miles away, and the wind won't stop blowing, and slowly they lose their minds. And it all comes to a head when Sister Ruth puts rouge on her cheeks and runs wild. And that reminded me that in the lighthouse, they polished the lenses with jeweller's rouge and cheap brandy, apparently. And then I had my story. And I'll tell you about it after this short commercial break.
Leise flehen meine Lieder durch die Nacht zu dir. In den stillen Hain hernieder, Liebchen, komm zu mir. Flüstern schlanke Wipfel rauschen in des Mondes Licht, in des Mondes Licht, des Verräters feindlich lauschen, fürchte Holde nicht, fürchte Holde nicht. Hörst die Nachtigallen schlagen, ach, sie flehen dich.
So I thought, what if you had a convent in a bleak, lonely, desolate coastline, miles from anywhere, where they have their own lighthouse, and some external event triggers a collapsing insanity amongst the holy sisters, similar to the movie Black Narcissus? Well, I loved the idea. So how to develop it? Well, this is what brought me to Kurt Vonnegut and his most outrageous short story formula. It goes like this. Man or woman falls into a hole. Man gets out of the hole in a better place than before he fell in. Well, it might seem simple, but I think you'll find just about every story ever told falls into this category. Because a story, in essence, is about someone who sets off on a quest, falls into the crucible of adversity, and encounters numerous difficulties, is burnished by these, and emerges changed. And not necessarily changed for the better, but psychologically changed. So who's going to fall into the crucible of adversity? Well, the Mother Superior, Sister Clodagh, and we'll give her a young troublemaker nun, a headstrong troublemaker called Sister Belladonna. But now first we need to give the Mother Superior a ghost, some wound on her soul, and we'll make it happen when she's a child and she got caught in a lie by her stepmother and locked in the cellar, and she says, "I'll never tell a lie again." And the stepmother says, "Oh, yes, you will. Once a liar, always a liar. Jesus doesn't like you." And all her life she's tormented by this, haunted by it. Is it true? Once a liar, always a liar? So let's start our story. It's 1840 in a convent off the coast of Ireland, West Ireland, on an island called Fingal's Regret.
I couldn't stop the wind from blowing and the air from being as clear as crystal, and I couldn't hide the mountain.
I told you it was no place to put a nunnery. There's something in the atmosphere that makes everything seem exaggerated.
And they've recently introduced the new latest mercury turning device, and the fumes are starting to eat away at the sanity of the Holy Sisters. And then there's a trigger. The body of a dead sailor is washed ashore. He's naked, and impossibly beautiful, like Adonis. And this sends shockwaves through the troubled hearts of the nuns. And later that night, Sister Belladonna is at work in the lighthouse, and tormented by the fumes of the mercury, and maybe fortified with a bit of that brandy I mentioned, she puts rouge on her cheeks and runs wild. And they find her at the grave, trying to dig up the sailor's grave, and they grab her and drag her off and lock her in the infirmary. But later that night, as a mighty storm hits the island, the sisters knock on Mother Superior's door and say, Sister Belladonna has escaped from the infirmary. And carrying my hurricane lamps, they search the island and they find her next to the grave. And she's built a snowman, an anatomically correct snowman, with quite a large you-know-what. On seeing this, 2 of the younger nuns faint, and 2 more start to meow like cats, and Sister Clodagh is now well and truly in her metaphorical hole. She knows she stands on the brink of a contagious madness that threatens to engulf them all and destroy everything she's worked for. In a moment of delirium, she snaps off the snow penis and runs to the kitchen, where she puts it in a saucepan and melts it on the stove. And then she pours the water into a simple glass jar. And then she returns to the lighthouse, and up in the light section is Sister Belladonna, struggling to extinguish the light. And she slips, and the burning sperm whale oil falls on her and turns her into a human torch. And she steps out onto the encircling balcony, and she's like a human wick lighting up the night, and then she slips and falls to her death. And the whole lighthouse now becomes engulfed in flames, burns to the ground, and goes out. The light is extinguished. And then all goes blurry, and we hear Sister Clodagh's voice. Well, that's just about all I can tell you, Sergeant. We see the notebook of a police sergeant sitting in the sitting room of Sister Clodagh, and he says, well, I think that'll be all for now, Sister Clodagh. The Board of Inquiry will be in touch in due course. You see, he's collecting statements for the inquiry into the shipwreck, the ship that went down after the lighthouse was extinguished. Remember the telegram I mentioned earlier about the SS Nantucket? So he closes his book and starts to leave, and then he said, but one thing puzzles me, Sister Clodagh. What part of the snowman was it that the Holy Sisters were all fighting over? And she looks at him, and she's transported back to that cellar in her childhood, and she hears the voice again. Once a liar, always a liar. And she says, it was his nose. His nose? Yes, his nose. It was a carrot. Sister Belladonna used a carrot, you see. The girls do so love a juicy carrot. And he thanks her and he leaves, and we see him getting onto the dinghy by the jetty. Up in the convent we see Sister Clodagh standing in the window, but her wimple has gone and her hair is blowing in the wind, and she's got rouge on her cheeks, and she's holding the glass of melted snow, and she drinks it. And I've decided to call it a jar of melted snow. Feel free to make some alternative suggestions in the comments, but keep them clean.